When you think of New Zealand, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's these incredible landscapes, a really high quality of life, basically a paradise on Earth. It's always been the kind of place people dream of moving to, not running away from. But that whole story, it's starting to flip, and fast. Let's just start with a number, 73,000. That's how many New Zealanders packed their bags and left the country in just 1 year. Now, for a nation of only about 5 million people, that is a massive, staggering number. But here's the real kicker. It's not retirees chasing the sun. The median age of the people leaving is just 29 years old. We're talking about young, skilled, working-age people, the very engine that's supposed to power the country's future. So you have to ask, how on earth did this happen? How did a country that's always at the top of the best places to live lists suddenly find itself watching its own future walk out the door? Well, to get to the bottom of it, we've got to rewind the clock. In our investigation, it points to one prime suspect, a set of really radical economic reforms from back in the 1980s, a total revolution that became known as Rogernomics. So what exactly was Rogernomics? Well, the easiest way to think about it is shock therapy for an entire economy. See, back in 1984, New Zealand's economy was basically on life support, and this was the bold, maybe even brutal plan to jolt it back to life. The plan was a complete overhaul. We're talking about massive deregulation, ripping up the tariffs that protected local businesses, killing off government subsidies, and just throwing the country wide open to the forces of the global market. It was a total hard reset. But, to understand why they felt they needed such a drastic cure, you really have to understand the disease. You have to look at the economy they were so desperate to fix. And to understand that situation, you just need one kind of wild statistic. In 1982, for every single person living in New Zealand, there were 23 sheep. The country wasn't just reliant on farming. Its entire economy was basically built on the back of a sheep. Just look at these numbers from 1951. It's insane. Over half of the country's entire export income came from wool. You throw in frozen meat, and suddenly 2/3 of the economy is tied to just one animal. And it was all being shipped to pretty much one customer, Great Britain. And then the whole model just broke. First, synthetic fibers get invented, and bam, wool prices collapse. Then Britain joins a European trade bloc, which slammed the door on New Zealand's main customer. By 1984, the economy was in a total nosedive. Something radical had to be done. And Rogernomics absolutely changed things, but it also had these huge unintended side effects. And maybe the biggest one of all was how it accidentally created a national obsession with one single asset: property. Okay, so here's how it went down. The deregulation suddenly opened up the stock market to everyday people. At first, it was an absolute frenzy. The market shot up 300% in just a few years. But then, the bubble burst in the most spectacular way, losing 71% of its value. It took 3 decades to recover. And the impact of that crash was just profound. An entire generation of New Zealanders got absolutely burnt. They were terrified of the stock market, so they went looking for a safer place to grow their wealth. And they found it in bricks and mortar. So at the exact same time, the government was pretty much by accident, creating the perfect recipe for a housing crisis. On one hand, they made it more expensive to build new homes with new taxes. But on the other hand, they made owning property the most tax-friendly investment you could possibly have. Just think about that. They were pushing people to buy existing homes while making it harder to build new ones. And the whole financial system just followed the money. Before all these reforms, mortgages were a pretty small piece of the pie for banks. But by 2020, they made up over 60% of all bank lending. The entire economy was shifting its focus to property. And the result of all this? Well, it's been a complete catastrophe for affordability. In Auckland, the biggest city, the median house now costs more than 17 times the median income. It's gotten so bad that New Zealand's own Human Rights Commission has called it a human rights crisis. But look, sky-high house prices are only half of the story. The other half is that wages just haven't been able to keep up. And this brings us to what's known as New Zealand's productivity puzzle. Let's just look at the raw numbers here. For every hour worked, the average Kiwi generates about $55 of economic value. Now compare that to $81 in Australia, the country most Kiwis are moving to, or $116 in the US. This isn't just a small gap, it's a chasm. And that gap translates directly into lower paychecks. So why is productivity so low? Well, decades after those big reforms were supposed to create this new, diverse economy, just look at what New Zealand is still selling to the world. Milk, meat, wood, fruit. It's still fundamentally an economy based on selling raw materials, not high-tech, high-value stuff. So instead of replacing farming with new, innovative industries, the reforms kind of just replaced it with construction and real estate, which has led to this really sharp description of the modern economy, that it's just a housing market with bits tacked on. And the investment numbers, they tell the exact same story. New Zealand spends about half the average of other developed countries on research and development. And it's a simple formula, right? Less R&D means less innovation, which means fewer high-value companies, and that ultimately means lower wages for everyone. And all of this leads to the country's current and seemingly impossible problem. It looks like New Zealand is caught in a trap that it built for itself decades ago. There are really two ways out of this mess. Option one, you fix housing by making it cheaper. But so much of the country's wealth is now tied up in property that a big price drop could trigger an economic crash, not to mention a massive political revolt. Okay, so option two, fix incomes by boosting productivity. But the country's small size and its sheer distance from major markets makes creating those high-wage industries incredibly difficult. In the end, there are just no easy answers here. The cost of living has become unsustainable, but the wages can't seem to catch up. So for that 29-year-old Kiwi looking at their future, it all boils down to one really tough question. When it feels like paradise is broken and there's no clear way to fix it, is the most logical choice you have left to simply